Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to do the review of the LK Chen Double Dragons Sui Dao, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly or not, so please forgive me if I am not. A couple quick things to note, disclaimers and general information before you hear me ramble about this particular thing. First and foremost, this is a review sample sent from LK Chen, and therefore I didn't pay any money for it, and if you think that makes me biased, you know before you hear me ramble about anything else. Two, I'm not a practitioner of Chinese martial arts. I don't know how to use this or in the right context, but I will put links to the videos that I've seen provided by LK Chen, as well as other reviewers about how this sword moves and other things, namely David at Sync Point. I think he did a really good review. I'll link to that in the description down below, and I think it's going to do a better job of covering the history as well as kind of ideas from a practitioner on how this sword performs and whether it might be a good fit for you. I don't have that information for you, so if that's what you're looking for, I suppose you can stop here. The other bit to note is that this is going to be part one of the video, and it should be relatively comprehensive and hopefully give you some information about if the sword is right for you or not. But I'm going to save basically the abuse and final thoughts for a later review. But this review will cover kind of general fit and finish, my thoughts on it, some close-ups and things like that that hopefully are helpful in your buying decisions, and also kind of my general thoughts on how well it handles and cutting and weapon dynamics and that kind of stuff. I'll save the abuse and destruction and how well it holds up to being stupid, is stupidly used and swung around at things that are kind of knowingly abusive for later. I don't want to do that, one, because I don't have a ton of time, and two, because it's very cold and I think that impacts the performance of the sword. I'm probably going to end up swinging it around and abusing it at a time where it's also very cold, but I'm not compelled to do it just at the moment. Anyway, with those things said, I'll put links to weapon dynamics, measurements, descriptions, all of the other information I have in the description down below. If you're interested in that kind of stuff, there you go. And from there, I'm going to start with a review and cover kind of the basics. The first thing to point out, well, not the first thing because I've rambled for like 5 minutes now about disclaimers, but one other thing to point out is that this is supposed to be like a historical replica. I think there are some additional options in terms of what you can get in terms of the blade and the metal that it's made from, the handle length, and maybe the material of the pommel. I'm not sure about the various options, but I do know that LK Chen has a few different iterations. I think this one is $370, though this could be the more expensive one given the folded steel and the blackwood handle and the bronzy pommel thing. I'm not 100% sure. I'll try to get clarification and put that in the description down below. That said, the main important thing is that this is supposed to be representing the proportions and dynamics of a historical artifact, and it's supposed to be close to a historical piece. And special thanks are supposed to go to Mr. Clarence Mackey, or McKay. Again, forgive me if I'm saying the name wrong, Clarence McKay, I think, who helped in the design, or at least providing some information that helped LK Chen provide this or develop this particular sword. So if it's not to your liking, if the proportions and size and blah 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 are not something you like, then well, this is supposed to be a historical artifact and capture the spirit of that historical artifact, both in the appearance as well as in the dynamic properties. And how well it does that, I frankly don't know. From the pictures that I've seen though, it does look pretty close. That said, from a modern sword enthusiast perspective, one that doesn't study Chinese martial arts, one that doesn't do that, I'm going to just look over things and you know, evaluate it from the standpoint of how well does it swing based on the comparison I have to other swords. And so I suppose keep that in mind. All right, without further ado, I'm going to talk more about the sword itself. So first I'm going to start with the pommel, and basically this has two dragons meeting. The pommel is by far my favorite part of the sword in terms of decoration. Now, I think LK Chen did a really good job of representing what the historic artifact is. I've seen some photos, and this looks like it captures the appearance and overall design pretty well. From a modern perspective, though, I don't think it's really all that great in terms of casting quality. The details could be more precise. It depends on what you want to go for, and I hate to have this argument where it's supposed to be a historical artifact, so we give leeway when they come really close and kind of forgive when things are stupid and far away based on how close it is to the historical piece. The main point is I think that over thousands of years that this particular sword may have lost some of its sheen and detail. I would venture a guess that the casting may have been more crisp when it was originally made versus the condition it's in now. And anyway, I think LK Chen did a good job of representing the historical piece, but to my mind, I think it could be a little crisper, a little cleaner, a little more precise. I say that from completely kind of ignorant eyes, but as how close does it get? It looks pretty close from the photos to me. It's also worth noting that from a practitioner standpoint, this does not hurt. I swung it around. I brought my kind of the meat of my hand around the ring pommel. My fingers don't naturally go in these holes, though I do have kind of giant sausage fingers. So to me, I didn't end up kind of pinching myself in the little pointy bits in here, but it is worth noting that it feels good from a practitioner standpoint. None of the ledges are rough, none of them hurt, and overall it feels very comfortable in comparison, particularly to many of the ring Dao that I've gotten to play with. This is a P-shaped ring, and so it's not completely circular. It's kind of squished a little bit. Honestly, it feels really good. I don't generally like even wheel pommels on European swords and how they meet my hand. This was actually one of the most comfortable ring Dao that I've experienced. It's a little thicker. The meat of my hand doesn't get cut. It doesn't vibrate. It doesn't hurt. Overall, from a practitioner standpoint, this is actually very pleasant, I should say. I don't mean practitioner standpoint. I mean enthusiast who swings swords around. I don't study Chinese martial arts, as I noted earlier. All right, next I'm going to talk about this little space area here. I don't know if this is part of the pommel or part of the grip, but this is basically a ring around the handle that's keeping it from splitting, presumably, and kind of joining up. The transitions here are nice. Again, none of the flab of my hand did not get caught in there. The transition here is relatively sharp, but I didn't notice it in terms of discomfort, in terms of where my fingers sit and all of these little florets and stuff. This transition did not hurt my hand particularly, but it is worth noting that the ring area here is the first brass fitting we're encountering, and it has some problems that are going to be consistent across every brass fitting on this, and that is that there's a level of detail. There's ridges, there's niceties. It's elliptical in shape. It helps index. It does the pragmatic, practical function that it's supposed to do pretty well. But in terms of finish quality, I make out little seams. I make out the spot where it looks like it's finished with a wire wheel, and then around the kind of ledge areas, there's little pockets and imperfections and things like that. So finish quality, I wouldn't say is great. This sword, again, assuming it's $370-ish, I can't necessarily expect a whole lot of fantastic finishing, but it's worth noting that that's kind of the quality you get. There's ridges, there's intention, there's some detail in terms of shaping, but the final leg is not really well done. The surfaces where the wheel or whatever thing they're doing to polish it can touch are good, but around the edges where it's a little harder to get it in there is not, and that is pretty consistent across many of the other brass fittings that we're seeing. Okay, the other bit, this ledge here doesn't hurt. It's not sharp, but it is certainly protruding in such a way that I would think it would hurt, but my hand didn't experience any discomfort in this area while I was using it and swinging it around. This little bit over here, so let's talk about these floret area things here, these rivets that go through, presumably the tang of the sword. I suppose we'll find out when we eventually break it. But these little rings are not as bad as I thought, honestly, or at least one of them isn't. So these have sharp ledges, and usually that means it's a recipe for my hands to bite on them and to hurt, and that didn't happen. They're sanded smooth in a way that the skin of my hands didn't experience any discomfort, with the exception of this one here. This nubbin thing that attaches this tassel is very uncomfortable, and it hurt my hand a lot. It was not fun to swing around. I did not like it, and this was the main complaint I would have about using this particular sword. It was really uncomfortable to feel the meat of my hand on this particular thing. Now, oddly, the tassel really just disconnects with a bit of a pull. It's not a full ring or anything like that. I don't know if that's intentional, and honestly, the tassel I didn't really like. Now, I don't know how to use this sword. Presumably the way you would move it and the flows that you would use, the tassel would not just wrap around your hand and become an inconvenience if you know how to use it correctly, which I don't, but I did not find it particularly helpful or nice. And so it's nice that it's removable easily, but this nubbin still sticks out and is wildly uncomfortable on the hand and jutted into the meat and fat of my hand, and I found it to be very, very unpleasant. Okay, that said, if you could grind this off or something like that, maybe it would be better, but I think I would like the sword more without this tassel-y bit here in terms of using it. The rest of it is actually pretty comfortable, though, surprisingly enough. These ledges, I can feel all of this stuff, and I would think that it's going to cause me some discomfort in using it. It didn't. It was really just this tassel that I noticed. That said, maybe the tassel was so bad that I just didn't notice any other problem because this, nail sticking out of the thing was uncomfortable enough. Okay, on to more positive things. This, I think, is the African Blackwood grip option. I don't know if this cost an extra $30 or not. This little stain here is for me measuring things. But It's elliptical, it's nice, it's well shaped, and honestly, whether my hands were wet or dry or cold or warm, it fit really well. I always knew where the edge was, and honestly, the rest of the grip, with the exception of this nub sticking out, was very, very comfortable to use. I had no complaints about using it. It was easy to index, it was easy to tell where the edge was. Well, it's not necessarily easy to tell where the edge is. I suppose you would know by how you're drawing it and kind of where the edge is by default. But at least in terms of kind of knowing which way to hold the sword, I certainly can tell it's a very comfortable grip to have. Actually, I suppose you know which way the edge is based on which side this tassel is on more than anything else, or how it's drawn based on how it's worn. I digress. If I move on to the crossguard area here, this is also made of the same kind of bronze. I don't know if it's supposed to be brass or if it's supposed to be the same kind of bronze that's on the pommel. I like the look of it. I like how the bronze meets and the aesthetics and appearance of it. That said, it is not terribly detailed, so it lacks some of the detail that you see in the pommel. It also has like what looks like odd little fingerprints or something like that. I don't know if it was cast from like the original components or something, or if it was 3D printed and just not finished up, but it looks like it could be more detailed than it is, or that it's just not quite finished as much as other components are. I don't exactly know what to make of it. I make out little lines and things like that on it, and they almost, again, look like fingerprints or imperfections in the casting. That said, there's no sharp ledges. It's actually a very, very nice pommel. Nothing butts up. If I choke up on the grip or something like that, it's comfortable to have your fingers against. In terms of practicality of the grip, for what it is, I think it is pleasant enough. It is a small crossguard. I don't know much about whether or not it is supposed to be or how effective it is, but in terms of feeling and swinging it around, it didn't bite me, which to me is a win. So inside the crossguard, there's a little gap area where the scabbard is supposed to meet, and it meets up with this habaki, or I don't know exactly what the Chinese terminology for it is, but this blade collar around here. And it does actually fit reasonably well. It catches a little bit in terms of how it lands in here. So if I put the blade in, which is, I'm doing it kind of haphazardly because I'm on camera, the back kind of butts in. And this is not great. It doesn't always go in right away. Sometimes it clips and sticks a little bit, but eventually it goes in there. The rings, I'll try to hold them. The blade doesn't rattle inside the scabbard, and it lines up with these this little collar area here, this little adornment of brass on here. And it does feel like that habaki area is actually providing some sort of tension so that it doesn't fall out, it doesn't rattle, and it feels like it's actually doing something. And unlike the other LK Chen products that I've had, this doesn't look like a repurposed katana habaki. This looks like it is bespoke to the atom. It doesn't look particularly well fit, honestly, but it does look like it is intended to go on this particular sword. I think it could be done better, but in terms of functioning, it appears to do, at least what I understand these blade collar functions do. It'd be nice if it kind of rolled into the saya a little better without clipping or clicking on anything, but I said saya, the scabbard, it'd be nice if it kind of fit in there a little bit better, but it seems to do what it's supposed to do. All right, in terms of the scabbard, I've noted that it doesn't rattle inside the scabbard and that the collar seems to fit, and so this throat section must be done reasonably well. If I talk about the other fittings though, this little brass bit right here, well, it lines up reasonably well, and I don't see like gaps and things like that in it. It moves around, and I imagine it could come off pretty easily with any bit of force. And also the rest of the fittings have come loose. Now, in previous LK Chen reviews, mostly the Frontier Tang Dao, I noted that the same thing happened to me, and apparently I've got some iterations with glue that's been improved. And so I don't want to harp on it too much because I've taken note of it and seem to be improving it. And they sent me a tube of silicone that I could put on here to fill up. I think honestly, like Gorilla Glue, if you can do it and put it on in such a way that it doesn't foam out of every orifice or something like that, is probably going to be more secure. This is one of those things, though, that from a historical perspective, I don't know what was used to secure these on, or if they just expected them to come loose. But I'd imagine that a weapon, something that's supposed to be used on a battlefield or in a duel, or that needs to be reliable, would have something better than, like rice glue or something like that holding it on. And I don't know what wooden tricks or carpentry iterations might have been done to secure these in such a way that they held on. But I don't imagine that they would just be kind of, we'd rely on some sort of makeshift glue. And that seems to be what's done here. It'd be nice if this bit, well, it looks like it's fit in about the right spot. This doesn't seem to notch up right on the crossguard area as I look at the photos of the historic piece. But it'd be nice if it didn't have to worry about it falling off, and it'd be nice if these weren't just held on by glue, but there was some sort of friction fit or some sort of other mechanical connection, whether it be a pin or a rivet or something like that in the scabbard. Again, that might go against the historical perspective of it, but it would, help them stay in place, I suppose. The other bit to note, as I talk about the fittings on the scabbard, these little rings are solid rings, but these little areas here are basically just kind of bits folded over. There's like a button that goes through, and there's two little divots that come out, and then this bit is folded over. So I could take these rings off pretty easily if I wanted to, and that might be helpful. You might be able to attach something, some other security system or some sort of other method to secure it to your belt or garb. But again, the flats area where they could get the wire wheel well finished. The other bits around the edges here show all the imperfections from casting and are not finished particularly well. So kind of follows suit with that area near the pommel. The wood, really well done. I don't see any imperfections along the surfaces. It's not ripply. It's not poorly done. There's no scratches or imperfections there. I do like the scabbard. I like that it doesn't rattle. I like that the habaki area seems actually well fit, and I like the wood. The fittings moving around is a disappointment, but I don't know how historic or ahistoric that is. Anyway, just worth noting. Now, if I talk about this kind of schwanz looking thing at the end here, this kind of chape area, one, there's a ledge here. It'd be really nice if the wood kind of just butted up and transitioned and there wasn't this kind of hard ledge here that might catch on things or just doesn't feel particularly good. Again, I don't know historically what it would have looked like, and I suppose it's diminished in such a way that it's really tough to tell detail-wise. But this is a very nice and well-made cap. Again, same problems. Well finished here around where the seams are. You can make out some of the imperfections from casting. That said, it is a very kind of sturdy scabbard. So if I take out the scabbard by itself, this feels almost like a weapon in and of itself. You could use it as a club in addition to the sword. I suppose when I get to actually testing the sword in an abusive way, I might actually do that and see how well it holds up. But this seems like a pretty hefty and well-built scabbard. And if you're really irritated about the imperfections around it, I suppose you could take out some sandpaper and improve them marginally. Anyway, let's move on to the blade, the pointy stabby part. So profile-wise, it is a long, straight blade with a distal taper. LK Chen, one thing to their credit, they do distal taper really well. This seems to be no exception. Starts out thicker, gets thinner. It feels like a weapon in the hand. I've left the tassel off while I'm doing this so it doesn't click in the microphone. It feels really good. It feels like a weapon that I could thrust with. It has easy point control, but it also, I feel, connected and easy to control in the slash. It didn't come particularly sharp, so this one, as you're seeing it, I have sharpened it, and the imperfections around the edge are from my belt sander and me trying to get a keener edge on it. I'm not particularly skilled at it, so keep that in mind. If you have some skill at sharpening, then you will probably be able to get a keener edge and thus better results in the cutting than I do. This does have some folded pattern on it, and it runs the entire length of the blade. It's very easy to see. The iteration that I have used Flitz metal polish on it to clean it up from my fingerprints and kind of slime from cutting and things like that. And so it does have a slightly diminished kind of pattern on it, but not egregiously so. The other bit to note in terms of profile, the flats, very clean. It's straight right along the edge, easy to index. And I suppose to know if I have my right hand and I feel this nub here, that's where the edge is. It's not teardrop shape in the same sense that I can inherently tell where the edge is. And it feels very similar either way here, but the tassel might identify where the edge is, obviously, as well as where it's mounted. There's no hollow ground or fullering or anything like that. It's just a plain flat section with a chisel edge. The edge didn't come particularly sharp, hence why I keened it up a little bit. And once I did keen it up, it seems to have cut effectively in terms of pool noodles and the various things that I cut with it. And I'm feeling along the surface of the edge after having cut with it, and it still seems to have the same edge that I put on it. Worth noting as well that there are imperfections in the polish. So it came with like a mirror polish with the folding pattern showing, and there were bits of saya rub, we call it in the katana realm of things, where basically it's shipped in the scabbard and it bounces around as it's shipped overseas, and there are blemishes and imperfections in the surface of the steel, and those came. So the ones that I'm looking at right here were there when I started. The ones along the edge were there because I sharpened it. But overall, it came pretty clean. Again, for $370, expecting perfection, you're going to be disappointed. So do expect there to be some scratches or minor blemishes on the surface of the steel. That said, in terms of dynamics, again, weapon dynamics will be in the link below. One hand, I found a lot of discomfort with this thing hitting the flesh of my hand, though I imagine if I wore a glove that would be mitigated. In terms of thrusting, I'm not particularly great with it, and it's cold and I'm on ice, but it thrust really well. It's a sword that you feel like you could hold on to all day long, and I think they make a few different grip options. I don't know if this is the longer or the shorter iteration. Honestly, I can't remember which one I have, but in terms of feeling like a weapon, it totally does. I feel like I have complete control over where the point is. I feel like if I bring two hands into it, I have more authority in the cut. And either way, it feels like it's gonna suit the purpose. If I bring two hands in, I have a lot more control. I have a lot more kind of stopping power. But honestly, one hand, I feel like I could do that and then bring the scabbard out and club you in the head with it. In terms of fun-feeling sword, it's good. It's small and light, but honestly, just it's a fun sword to move around. Now, in terms of cutting, obviously, I don't know the martial systems that this is used in to cut, but I had a lot of fun cutting. Cut the pool noodle reasonably well with one hand. If I sharpened the edge and got it even keener than it is and had more skill with that, it would probably have cut even more effectively. But with two hands, I was able to kind of get through the pool noodle, and those can be deceptively challenging targets. I then brought it to popcorn bags just because I had them around and figured why not. I was actually kind of impressed with how well it cut the popcorn. So the popcorn's obviously very light. Many of you may be familiar with a popcorn bag. Those expired in 2012, hence why I'm just cutting them and feeding the squirrels in my backyard. But it actually cut through many of the bags, and I was actually somewhat impressed with how well it moved through the bag. Suffice to say, then water bottles obviously cut through water bottles. And then I tried some styrofoam and wrapped jeans around it, and it didn't cut that. And that's really where I'm going to stop for the testing in this video. I will do more aggressive things later with it. I'll take it to whatever targets, but this is actually where I could use some feedback from you. What targets would you find helpful from an abusive standpoint? What would you like me to do with this sword so that you don't do it with yours? And you want to know, does it hold up against, branches, impersonating spear shaft, so to speak? Thrusting, is it important that it be able to thrust through a particular type of thing? What would be helpful to see from a more abusive standpoint? I'm going to stop the cutting where I've had it here and say that from my personal impressions, it seems to do the things that it's supposed to do. It'd be nice if it came with a little keener edge, and it seems to be a little hit or miss from LK Chen. That said, it cut reasonably well. It was pretty easy to sharpen, honestly. If I'm capable of doing it, chances are you are. And overall, I think it did all the things that it's supposed to do. It's still straight. The edge held up well, so I put a more refined edge on it, and I hit hard things, and it was cold. So if the edge was going to diminish, it would, but it still feels like an edge I wouldn't want to run my fingers against. And yeah, I think it's doing all the things that it's supposed to do. But before I give my final thoughts in part 2, I do want to ask you, what would you like to see? And now's your chance before I get to it. It's going to be a couple months before I can break it. Throw it in the commentary down below. Let me know what tests you would like to see, what would be helpful, if there's anything above and beyond the typical shenanigans that I tend to get into. Anyway, that's all I've got for you at the moment. Hopefully this has been helpful. If you're interested in buying one of these, hopefully the close-ups and video and all that kind of stuff have given you more information. That's all I've got for the moment. Stay tuned for part 2, hopefully in the next couple months. I'll put a link to it in the description down below when it becomes available. And that's all I got. As always, cheers and thanks for watching.